الحمد لله الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Brother Chairman, Dato' Kamrul, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it dawns on me that it is becoming increasingly difficult to render the subject on Egypt, on the crisis in Egypt in a different way. Considering that various speakers today and the last couple of days have been looking at it virtually from the same standpoint. But looking at the unfolding crisis, the motive which propelled them to unseat Morsi, and also to look into the possible or if not probable future as a result of the respective coup. So in attempting to recycle this very version of current history, I'll try and give a fresh view of the subject, fresh at least from my standpoint, which should be able to complement us with something which can be considered general in nature, i.e. by looking at the unfolding crisis, by situating it in a larger context, by looking at it at a larger picture, by narrowing not just on the current events in Egypt, but also on the recent past. After all, the forces have been at work which has produced this very phenomenal development in the Arab world, including the Arab Spring itself, do not have its origin in the recent election itself. One can easily work backward in time by looking at the very least the days of imperialism and colonialism, which has produced the so-called nation states within the Arab world. As a result of which, the whole of the Arab world has faced what we call the fragmentation of the worst kind, with different Arab states pursuing different political goals. And this has been further compounded by the very division that has been inherent in Arab society itself, as a result of tribalism, the spread and the proliferation of the various mazhab which have underpinned, which have undergirded the development of recent Arab history. That's number one. Number two, one cannot rule out the forces that have been working as far as the Israelis, the Jews, and the Zionist movement have been preoccupied with. How, beginning in the 18th century, 19th century, and culminating in 1948, the Jews through the Zionist movement were able to establish the state of Israel right in the midst of the Middle East. And for them, it becomes incumbent of them, it becomes a necessity of them. It's a question of life and death for them to ensure the survival of Israel. And more than that, to ensure the expansion of Israel to ward off any possible enemies arising from the Arab people, the Arab countries, and so on and so forth. So that is the second part of the story. And lately, with globalization, with greater globalization, with greater commercialization of the Arab world, you have the way has been propelled by its economic design to ensure that the Arab world becomes its market, to ensure that the Arab world becomes a source of supply for its petroleum and so on and so forth. So to them, anything untoward which occurs within the Arab world, which might derail the process of industrialization, which might undermine the process of greater commercialization is considered anathema, something which might necessarily militate against the whole idea of greater industrialization in the West. And number 4, lately we have also the democracy project, i.e. how the West imbued the ideas that greater democratization of the world will necessarily entail greater peace, in line with thought of the famous German philosopher Immanuel Kant, i.e. that with greater democracies, with the creation of new democracies in the world, they will not go to war against each other, which means at the end game will be a greater peace of the world, greater prosperity for the world, and so on and so forth. Meaning that so long as they are able to have all that, and so far they have the best of everything, before the eruption of the Arab Spring, before Morsi came to power. For the Arab populace, for the Arab masses, who have not been nurtured in a democratic tradition, we're looking for a better life economically, to be able to be under the tutelage of military since 1951-52 under General Nasir or General Najib, and later on under Jamal Abdel Nasir, and later on under Anwar Sadat, and later on under Mubarak. They could have never had it so good. Because under the military regimes of the time, they were able to prosper in a limited way, having catapulted themselves to better positions with at least the other people in the Arab world. And for the West in particular, since the rise to power of Anwar Sadat and Mubarak, all of their earlier interests were taken care of. They were able to trade with Egypt. They were able to turn Egypt into their picnic ground. They were able to turn Egypt into their staunchest of allies in the wars against Iraq and also in wars against Afghanistan and so on and so forth. Similarly, in the case of Anwar Sadat, the Israelis would have never been so good, all because in 1971 it was followed by 1979 with the treaties which enabled the Israelis to really bang their hope on the Egyptian government to enable them to sustain Israel and to assure that Israel is going to remain a superpower or at the very least a middle power in the Middle East. In short, with the various constellation of power, the word in international relations is the configuration of power. You have had what we call a coincidence of interest, a convergence of interest within the West propelled by imperialism and communism, between the Jews and Israel propelled by their interest in sustaining Israel, with that of the military regime, which by then were able to gain sustenance from the West. When America came to the East by pumping billions of dollars worth of military help for the sake, for the survival of the military in the very country concerned. The only forces that have been at work, which proved to be of an unmixed, not of an unmixed blessing, i.e. greater democratization. So as far as imperialism and colonialism was concerned, it really works well, worked wonders, so long as the military was there. As far as commercialization and industrialization of the West is concerned, it also is very much in accord with the interests of the military, which has prospered as a result of this symbiotic relationship. As far as Israel is concerned, with Anwar Sadat and also Mubarak in power, they too stand decaying and the Arab stood to lose virtually everything. For me, with the eruption of the recent crisis, Israel do not need to wait for the 5th Arab-Israel war. They are winning. The way the Americans were able to win following the devolution of the Soviet Union, following the collapse of the communist world in the late 70s and in early 80s. But as I told earlier, ladies and gentlemen, greater democratization does not necessarily benefit the West. There have been this lurking fear in the West that in the event of greater democracy, the Arabs might choose other things other than what the West wanted. They have already warned Mubarak, and Mubarak also had been warning the West that in the event of an election in Egypt, the Ikhwan, the Muslim Brotherhood, might be catapulted to power, and that will not necessarily be in favor of the West. And this has been proven true as far as Algeria was concerned, with the rise to power of Madani, Abbas Madani, and also in regards to the experience of Hamas having born in Gaza, and so on and so forth. So meaning that as far as the West is concerned, they have been forewarned that in the event of a victory for Morsi, for Muslim Brotherhood, they might stand to lose, and so on. That is very much their motive, and that very motive is very much in line with their larger motive that I have just spelled out in regards to colonialism, in regards to imperialism, in regards to industrialism, and in regards to greater Israel interests, which will necessarily include Judea and Samaria. Israel interests, which will necessarily include Judea and Samaria, and to all intent and purpose to include the whole of Arab world. So long as the Arab world will able to counter to the Israeli needs, able to counter to the Israeli regime, they will never stop short of confronting them. The way they have confronted them in 1948 in the first Arab-Israeli War, the way they have done it in 1967 when they were able to overcome the whole of the military Arab might, the way they have done in 1973, and so on and so forth, meaning that they don't have to wait for another fifth Arab-Israeli War, fifth Arab-Israeli, in order to achieve the necessary goal, in order to achieve victory for the Israeli people. So ladies and gentlemen, there is also another fear lurking there. Assuming that Morsi is able to advance the Islamic cause and is going to cut eyes with the people, the masters of Egypt, is going to have a contagious effect, a contagion of a kind, of which has been said earlier by some of the speakers. He is going to impact on the Arab world. That this very experiment in Egypt is going to have its spillover effect on the existing Arab state, if not beyond. Meaning that Islamization in Egypt through the electoral process will have an impact on Islamization in Tunisia, in Arab Saudi, and so on and so forth. For the very simple reason that success might beget greater success. Success will produce greater success. Perhaps if we can allude to the success story of Spano, we can see a similar thing unfolding. How the success in the first 4 years has produced greater success to the extent that the very people who wanted to unseat it were at a loss, at least for now. And to come up with this more elders than me, as far as that is concerned. So ladies and gentlemen, the moment Morsi was in power, it becomes clear to them that if this is not really nip in the bud, then they are going to have the worst case scenario unfolding right in this. And Morsi has to them shown this true color to them by aligning himself with Iran, his other enemy. By befriending Hamas, by opening the tunnel to arm the Palestinians to move to and fro, and also to befriend Turkey, which is becoming a burgeoning Muslim power in the Middle East. This very alignment is too much for the West to swallow, number one. Number two, something that has been downplayed by so many people, is the very success, even within the limited time as noted by the government, by giving houses to the people who are considered the helpless or the have-not. By giving sustenance and support to the single mothers, by giving employment to the jobless by the thousands. But this has never appeared in the West, never been given prominence by anybody, all because they don't want to see success as I denoted earlier. So in other words, the so-called inclination shown by Morsi, whether it goes through as Islamic or not, will necessarily entrench the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, thereby giving way to greater Islamization, greater role of Muslim Brotherhood in Sudan probably, or in other adjacent countries. This is also a motive which must be spelled out to show that all that is happening right now is part of the larger agenda, which has its role in colonialism, imperialism, which has its root in the Israeli struggle and dominated by Zionist movement. It has its root in Western democratization and greater democratization of the current of which the West wants to pontificate and also to allow it to prosper, i.e. democratization which will necessarily lead to the spread of the Western ideal of progress. This is crucial. Coincidentally, this very morning I was penning an article for IQ on the subject of the West and the Western ideal of progress, which refers to the greater role of man, even at the expense of God. The enlargement of the intellectual, of scientific knowledge at the expense of theological knowledge and so on. And also to allow the sensitive culture to overtake virtually everything, to allow materialism and humanism to override everything in life. So in other words, democratization will necessarily pave the way for this kind of intrusion of the Western idea of progress, so much that the whole of the Arab world will be receptive, the word is receptive, to whatever feelings, whatever approaches made by the West. When they come to them as tourists, they can really dress the way they like, even right in front of the mosque in Al-Azhar. When they come to savoring the best of food, they can take anything, halal or non-halal, to ensure that the whole world becomes another picnic ground to them. And when it comes to other things, of course, politics and economy, they wanted to ensure that the whole of that world will continuously remain dependent on us in this kind of lopsided relationship, so much that we in South Asia, they in Egypt are succumbing to the winds and fancies of the West, armed with what I just mentioned as the Western idea of progress. So, now we come to the last point in regards to the whole worst-case scenario I just made. Now the military under Sisi having severed the good life under Mubarak, having been able to invoke the halcyon days of Anwar Sadat and Najib, might like to resurrect the military regimes once again. After all, as I noted earlier, they have never had to good, and for Sisi, this is time for me to once again reinvent us and come up with a remedy of its own to ensure that the military is going to prosper. Moreover, his entourage, his overtures have been pretty well supported by the Americans, by Arab Saudis mentioned by Dr. Kamaldin just now, which means you have those partners of the West in the Middle East who are ready, able, and willing to come to the help of Sisi to ensure his survival and so on and so forth. That's number one. Number two, if at all Morsi were to be reinstated, the chances are that Sisi himself will be having his words of this. Meaning he'll be detained, he'll be imprisoned indefinitely, or even hanged for whatever he has done. So he's facing the what we call a zero-sum game situation. Either there is mercy there or cease there. So there are nothing in between. There are no middle way as far as he is concerned, with the exception of mercy and abuse. Pressure by the world will lead to the unseating of Sisi in a couple of days, and so on and so forth. And now we come to the other motive related to it all. I mentioned earlier about Palestine and the Jewish struggle. For the Arabs who have been embroiled in a war against Israel in 1948, in 1967, and earlier on during the Suez Crisis, and also in 1973, they by now immersed and embroiled in this so-called calamitous situation. We have less and less time to devote to the Palestinian issue. This is the very thing that they wanted very much. And on top of that, as noted by some scholars, it has always been the interest of Israel to ensure greater fragmentation of the Arab world, to ensure the military machine are not able to live to the expectation of the Arab world. Even the best of weapons given to them by America will necessarily be of inferior type to those that have been bestowed on the Israeli regime. Which means, in the circumstances of war, the like of 1967, the like of 1973, there is no way for the Arabs to win in a war once pitted against the arch enemy, Israel, and so on and so forth. So meaning that, with unfolding events, they have usually caught everything. One, the imperialist drive and their motive, the design of the industrial military complex of the West, the Zionist movement, and even the military regime, and so on and so forth. So first of all, the odds are great. But we do hope that وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. And we do know that the Israelis, the Jews, and the Christians will never stop in their work in order to undermine the Muslim. وَلَمْ أَرْضَى أَنْكَ الْيَهُودُ وَلَمْ نَصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُمْ. So this is plain. So for the Egyptians who have been in the midst of this struggle, like it or not, of force, they have to go on to ensure that there's not going to be a reversal of the process. And we, in our little way, from Malaysia, and we do hope the government, powers that we will come in and join the mainstream of events, and the world at large, to somehow ensure that their very presence is going to impact on this very moment. Inshallah, whatever we have done today, with our participation, by making our voice heard across this room and the various, which will necessarily reverberate well beyond the frontiers here, and with all the praise we say, inshallah, we are going to put a stop to it. Inshallah. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.